When it comes to video game history, a few companies made an impact from the very beginning. Nintendo is definitely one of them. Nintendo has played a major part since the 1980s and has maintained a position of importance and influence. Despite numerous challenges from rivals, speaking of rivals, Sega is another name that's recognizable. While the company no longer dabbles in video game hardware outside of some arcade machines, it was, for a long time, Nintendo's main competitor. Then there's Atari, the company that possibly helped inspire companies like Nintendo and Sega to flourish. Atari created the first truly mass-market home gaming system in the shape of the VCS, later renamed to the 2600, and also pioneered the concept of licensing the software of other companies when it paid Taito for the rights to port Space Invaders to its consoles. It even accidentally created the concept of third-party publishing when it treated 4 of its key staffers so poorly that they decided to leave Atari and set up a brand new company called Activision. However, despite its success in the 1970s and early 80s, Atari made some pretty big blunders both before and after the video game crash of 1983, where the market collapsed after a flood of poor quality games were released for the aging VCS, a console that, by 1982, was beginning to seriously show some limitations. The irony is that 2 of the biggest mistakes could have potentially been avoided, and Atari might have looked a lot different in the future. Let me explain. Back in 1982, the industry was in a weird place. The Atari VCS was an undisputed champion of the home gaming arena, and Atari had become almost interchangeable with the term video game. The company was selling millions of copies of its most popular games, and it looked like Atari wasn't slowing down. But then, the bubble was about to burst. When Atari posted lower than expected earning projections, the crash of '83 was now in full effect. Over in Japan, Nintendo was working on the Famicom home console following the runaway success of its Donkey Kong arcade machine. Donkey Kong was able to truly put the company on the map in the world of interactive entertainment. Hiroshi Yamauchi, the president of Nintendo at the time, knew that success in Japan was only one part of the puzzle. The company's real gains had been made in the United States via aforementioned Donkey Kong coin-op arcade game, and any home hardware it released would need to be released in America to maximize its potential sales and profit. The issue was that Nintendo, despite scoring a hit in arcades, was still relatively unknown in the US and lacked the infrastructure and experience to release a home console in that region. To solve this issue, Nintendo turned to Atari. In early 1983, Yamauchi instructed Nintendo of America Vice President Howard Lincoln to call Atari and discuss the possibility of the 2 companies working together to launch the Famicom stateside. Given that this contract occurred months after Atari CEO Ray Kassar had announced that the company's sales goals had been missed, and Atari's attempts to create a successor to the VCS had stumbled. The 5200 Super System was uneventful, while the 7800 Pro System wouldn't hit the market until 1986, despite being ready for release years earlier. This was a dream deal on paper. Nintendo basically offered Atari the opportunity to sell the Famicom under its own brand in exchange for paying Nintendo a royalty on every console. Atari effectively had nothing to lose. It was unknown at the time if the still in development 7800 was more powerful than Nintendo's console, but by licensing the Famicom, it had a solid backup plan that would cost it nothing in terms of R&D. A meeting was quickly formed, and Lincoln, along with Nintendo of America President Arakawa, was flown to Atari's California HQ to draft out the deal. Negotiations took several days to resolve. Yamauchi was growing restless and wanted to know what the answer was going to be. Atari boss Kassar gave final approval to the deal. Atari would distribute the Famicom under its own brand name in North America and would potentially enable Nintendo to get its product into millions of households all over the country. It was a done deal. Former Nintendo of America President Howard Lincoln told video game journalist and historian Stephen L. Kent some years later, "We had the whole thing put together." As we all know, this did not go the way it should have. At CES 1983, Coleco, the firm behind the ColecoVision home console, a key VCS rival, demonstrated its Atom home computer. Based on the same core tech as the ColecoVision, it was capable of running ColecoVision cartridges, and that included Nintendo's crown jewel, Donkey Kong. Nintendo had licensed the game for release on the ColecoVision console and duly used this title to promote the Atom computer. The fact that it was capable of playing games was seen as a key selling point. Former Atari CEO Ray Kassar was on the verge of signing a deal with Nintendo, but parted ways with the company before it could be finalized. However, Atari had purchased the home computer rights for the game, and when Atari representatives saw Donkey Kong running on its rival computer, it was instantly assumed that Nintendo had broken its agreement. You have to understand that Donkey Kong was the main reason anyone would be interested in working with Nintendo, Howard Phillips said to Kent. Mario Bros. And our other games were good B titles. Super Mario Bros. Had not come out yet, and the only game that did better than Donkey Kong was Pac-Man. If Coleco had Donkey Kong, Atari had no reason to work with us. Nintendo, for its part, had no idea that Coleco was using Donkey Kong to showcase the Atom, and Coleco, in its defense, wasn't promoting a home computer version of the game, which is what Atari owned the rights to, but was instead showing off the fact that the Atom could run ColecoVision cartridges. An emergency meeting was quickly arranged between Atari, Coleco, and Nintendo, agreed to stop demonstrating Donkey Kong with the Atom, or combining it with the machine. However, while the deal was saved, it ended up being somewhat debatable following revelations that he had offloaded 5,000 shares of Warner Communications stock prior to the announcement that Atari's profits were going to be lower than expected. Ray Kassar was forced to resign from his position as CEO of Atari, and the revised Nintendo deal remained unsigned. With the key supporter of the deal within Atari now out of the picture, everything completely came to a stop. With the Atari deal seemingly dead, and the Famicom selling extremely well in Japan, Nintendo decided to go at it alone and release the console in the States as the Nintendo Entertainment System, a machine which would not only change the face of gaming worldwide and establish the Japanese company as a global leader in the realm of interactive entertainment. The struggling Atari, on the other hand, would be sold by a parent company, Warner Communications, to former Commodore boss Jack Tramiel in 1984, creating Atari Corporation. Despite the change of ownership, you think that Atari would have been more mindful of making a similar mistake down the line. However, history nearly repeated itself towards the end of the 80s. Sega, having failed to even dent Nintendo's stranglehold with its 8-bit Master System, decided to break ties with North American distributor Tonka and court other partners. While it felt like it could probably handle the Japanese launch of its next system, the 16-bit Mega Drive, on its own, Sega was mindful of the fact that cracking North America was a different proposition entirely. It needed a US company that had experience in the field as well as a distribution and marketing network already in place. And to turn to, you probably already know the answer, Atari. Sega chairman Dave Rosen came to Atari and asked if we'd be interested in taking over the manufacturing, marketing, and distribution of Genesis. Michael Katz told Stephen Kent. Katz was then the president of Atari Corporation's video game division and had been instrumental in helping Atari to its best year since 1982 in terms of earnings. The Atari 7800 console had carved out enough of a share of the market to propel the company towards a revenue total of $452 million in 1988. We came very close to making a hefty licensing deal so that Atari could jump into the 16-bit fray before Nintendo, said Katz. The negotiations went pretty far down the stream, and as I recall, they fell apart when Jack Tramiel and Dave Rosen couldn't agree to the terms. Then Sega decided to do it themselves. Sound familiar? Once again, Atari managed to get defeated again. Sega would follow Nintendo's lead and release the Mega Drive, or Genesis as it was known in North America, itself, stealing away market share from the aging NES, establishing a rivalry with Nintendo that would last all the way through the 16-bit era. Ironically, Katz would be one of the people who helped shape this legacy. He joined Sega in 1989 following a job offer from Rosen and oversaw the iconic Genesis Does What Nintendo advertising campaign that enabled Sega to take over as much of North America market. Katz was also an important figure in Sega's drive to sign up sports stars such as Arnold Palmer, Joe Montana, and James Buster Douglas to appear in Genesis games, another important factor in the console's early success. Anyways, Atari, as we all know, stumbled from one disaster to another. The Atari XE computer flopped. Its Lynx handheld was powerful but overpriced and also required a lot of batteries to keep it running. The much hyped Jaguar home console failed to find an audience. The company's relationship with Sega took another twist in 1994 when it signed a deal over usage of Atari patents and Sega titles. A deal which was supposed to allow Atari to use Sega IP on the Jaguar, but 2 years later, the company effectively ceased to exist. The Tramiel family wanted out of the video game business, and in July of 1996, Atari was merged with hard disk drive manufacturer letter JTS, and the iconic Atari logo all but disappeared. Toy company Hasbro bought the rights to Atari's IP in 1998 for $5 million, and since then, the brand has been passed around to different owners. Looking back, it's amazing to think that Atari had not one but two chances to totally revive its own company. Yet, it allowed both to pass it by. What would the video game market look like today had Atari released the NES with its name on the box? Would it have done as good as a job as Nintendo did? Probably not. But what about the Genesis? Could the Atari of the late 80s really have pulled off a better hardware launch than Sega? Highly debatable. But until then, we'll never know for sure. If you made it to the end of this video, I'll see you guys next time, and thanks for watching.